unprecedented, I think it is also somewhat unique still in the sense that this is not something that when this crisis sort of ends or passes to the next phase, really, right? Until we have a vaccine, I don't think we can really say the crisis will have ended. It's going to be just a gradual evolution of our behavior as it pertains to this risk that we don't yet have a resolution for it as humans. Our human nature will be to continue to be very guarded until we can have greater confidence that there is a vaccine and that the vaccine works. And so all of the behavior that we're experiencing right now around having our teams working from home isn't going to go back directly to what we had before. Instead, we'll be in a new world. We'll be in a world where people have different understandings of what it means to work from home. We'll be in a world where people appreciate not having to spend 2 hours a day in the tube or 2 hours a day on the roads getting to and from an office. And that's significant. And I think that as people see what has or has not worked for their organizations with regard to working from home, we'll see companies begin to change their policies, organizations changing their policies to either have greater flexibility or greater understanding of why they can't be flexible, why it doesn't work for them. We actually see some evidence of this right now in the Australian market. The second largest telco in Australia, Optus, has already announced that they are going to adopt a greater work from home policy going forward as a result of what they've learned from this crisis. But here's what's not changing. Our approach to how we monitor our environment doesn't change. Our frameworks, our methodologies, what Loop1 has been doing for the last 10 years and what those in the industry, so many of you and ourselves have been doing really for the last 20 plus years, understanding our networks, understanding the systems and applications that those networks deliver, and understanding the way that we effectively monitor that environment isn't new. What we've done over the last year here at Loop1, beyond expanding around the globe and creating a new global workforce dedicated to our SolarWinds services, is we're starting to share in a much more transparent way our secret sauce, our own best practices, the things that we maybe were less inclined to try to talk about publicly previously for fear of losing control of kind of our offerings. We've decided it's time for us to share more of how we do what we do at a deeper level. And so to begin that, we've created what we call the Itom Plus framework. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time this morning talking about our approach, Itom Plus and the Loop1 monitoring maturity model, and how we use this approach to help businesses and organizations deliver on their outcomes that they're committed to providing to their clients and customers. As we look at what's happened due to the crisis, at Loop1, it wasn't something that just landed when it reached our offices. It wasn't something that we started seeing because we were directly affected. We began seeing the effects of the crisis, just as many of you may have, because there are so many global organizations that we support. Organizations with a global footprint, like so many of our clients, they began to see the effects as the crisis had different reactions through the global regions, throughout Asia, and then into Europe and into North America. The political responses, the state and government responses, and then, of course, the corporate responses, while those grew from Asia back to the rest of the world, we saw it from the beginning. One of the other things we saw is that this now more than ever is when community matters. Being able to connect with your peers, talk about what they're witnessing, talk about how they're responding, talk about how they're adjusting their approach to better fill the needs of the organization in a work from home world. And SolarWinds responded as well. Back in March, SolarWinds started sharing their COVID-19 Resource Center, and they did that in a couple of different ways. So we have a couple of URLs in the slides here, but I'll also just go ahead and show you what they've done in these sites. So the first one is the SolarWinds COVID-19 Response Resource Center. And within this resource center, they created a whole series of different blog posts and videos and resources talking not only about the technology itself, but also about the people and the processes and the social effect of these changes. And so there's some really great resources here that you can use to see what others are doing and compare that to your own strategies as you look at your approach to the crisis. And of course, within this, we have some very technical content as well. We've got some dashboard content, and that's what we're here to talk about today, is how we can use the SolarWinds tools and custom dashboards to really understand the impact of work from home in our organizations. And the second resource that they shared is on Thwack. So if you're not familiar with Thwack, I would encourage you to please register on Thwack, create an account for yourself, and take advantage of the Thwack community. For those of you that aren't familiar, Thwack is SolarWinds' primary method of interfacing with you. You can join, you don't have to own any products, it's open to the world, there's no cost, and there's more than 150,000 of your peers active in this community. And across this community, you can talk to SolarWinds product specialists, you can talk to SolarWinds head geeks like Kevin Sparenberg, KM Sigma here, the community manager. And you can also connect with Loop1 and of course, other individuals like yourself. And there are a lot of different resources available out here. There's any number of different topics, product questions, how-to questions, example scenarios, just all kinds of great content available through Thwack. So if you don't have a Thwack ID, or if you haven't used Thwack before, I would encourage you to please take some time to get familiar with the community and take advantage of the community. So let's talk a little bit about the Loop1 approach to great monitoring. This is what we call Itom Plus. And at its root, Itom Plus is really simple. It's made up of these three things. It's made up of the people. And we'll talk a little bit more about people in just a moment, but this is not just Loop1's people. This is yourselves, and this is SolarWinds, and this is how we all three as organizations work together to achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. And of course, it's about tools. The tools that we use to monitor our environment are just a part of the story. It's really about all of the tools, ITOM tools, ITSM tools, integration between tools, scaling and automation of our tools, so that we can really get everything that we need from our tools to feed information into our business and to go well beyond the idea of just whether something is up or down. That's old school. In the new school, we go much, much deeper. And that, of course, brings us to LIME, what we call the Loop1 monitoring maturity model. And I'm going to go into much more depth on that here in just a moment. So starting with the tools, when we talk about tools from an Itom Plus perspective, what we're really talking about is how we ensure full stack visibility, making sure that we have every aspect on an end-to-end basis instrumented and monitored so that we really know the full story behind those digital user experiences that IT is built to deliver. When somebody's using a website, whether it's an application hosted in your data center or whether it's an application hosted in a cloud, or if it's something that's in a hybrid deployment, we need to be able to know from the web interface to the application layer to the database, virtualization and cloud, and into our network transports. We need to know where potential performance issues occur and be able to go address those issues. So when we deploy tools in an Itom Plus methodology, we talk about being feature complete. I know that many of you have shared with me in the different interactions that we've had where you've invested in a tool and it's got 2 or 3 sort of key features that you're probably using, but it's got 5 or 8 or 10 other features that you know little about or aren't taking advantage of. So when you work with Loop1, our mission is to help ensure that every feature is understood and that you're adopting the features that make sense for you. So we really work together to make sure that your investment in these tools is feature complete to gain that full stack visibility. And as we talk about what it means to really be deployed correctly, we know that today it's not just about whether something is online or offline. We know that today we use phrases like slow is the new down, and it's true. We're very accustomed to high performance networks in our lives. We're accustomed to fast interfaces. And when things don't load quickly, we're easily distracted. So we really want to be talking about our application delivery being fast. As we move more into the line model, we'll also talk about the fact that today, security and compliance have to be intrinsic. It's not an afterthought. It's not something you do after you get it working anymore. Today, from the beginning, security and compliance are built in from the very first design stages to the final deployment stages. And then finally, it won't really provide nearly the benefit that we're intending it to provide if we're not doing a good job of building what we call intelligent dashboards. We're surrounded by products that have dashboards. Everything we buy has a dashboard. But it's the way we use those dashboards intelligently to really deliver the right information from all different sources in a single view to the right audience. Whether that means we're building dashboards that are custom for teams like server teams or network teams, virtualization teams, or more importantly, if it's delivering dashboards to the people who need to know the health of an application, maybe application owners, project managers, other stakeholders, providing them with dashboards that are maybe a little less technical, but much more business outcome focused, so that they can see what we can see, and we're sharing information, we're doing it across the silos in our organization, and we're encouraging people to be informed. One of the things that we've seen as a result of COVID, and it's something that we've been promoting really for years now, is the idea that your Orion console is not just for the IT team. The IT individuals that run Orion are going to use it every day. There are some power users that you'll have across your organization, but then increasingly there should be other dashboards, intelligent dashboards made for an even wider audience so that more people can benefit from the information that we can gain from our tools. And so that's what we're talking about in that audience. We're talking about the people involved in making this happen, from the designers and implementers all the way to the stakeholders and application owners that care about the information we're gathering. So we're combining the resources of Loop1, of SolarWinds, and yourself to make sure that we have an Itom and a service management solution that truly helps drive business outcomes. And if you haven't seen these communications from SolarWinds yet, you will soon, and many of you probably already have. But SolarWinds is changing the way they work with you, especially out of the North American market, but definitely across the world. SolarWinds is ready to have a more direct relationship, person to person. Now, obviously, today in the world of COVID and the pandemic, we're not doing it in person. We're doing it over video conference. But SolarWinds has been building new strategic relationship teams, in particular for their top sort of 1,000 accounts, where they're wanting to engage their executive team, their product team, and their clients to be able to have almost a more traditional relationship with their clients to better serve your needs. And Loop1 is a big part of that, being that SolarWinds doesn't have their own professional services organization, and they don't intend to build one. We are the largest and most capable professional services organization partnered with SolarWinds globally. And so we're hand in hand with them, beginning this new strategic relationship with accounts like yourself to help ensure that you're getting the most from your tools. There's a lot of benefits to doing this. In particular, what we're doing is helping organizations, businesses, healthcare businesses, public institutions, state and local government, all different types of organizations take a strategic approach to their tools, to Itom and to ITSM, so that we have better budgetary alignment, better value out of the tools across different teams so that we're tearing down silos and creating information sharing. And we're taking that strategic ownership at the executive level from CTO, CIO, CISO, and all of the other executive members of an organization that have IT focus, and bringing that all the way down to the practitioners, which is a bit of a change from the SolarWinds approach in the past, where they were really working directly with practitioners on affordable, easy to use, easy to buy. All of those things are still true, but they're now wanting to work with you, and we're wanting to work with you in a more strategic way. So practitioners are just as important as they've always been, and we're working with practitioners to start to bring in our tactical level of directors and managers, product owners, stakeholders, application owners, to understand how we can best serve them and get more value from the tools. And then, of course, having that strategic executive buy-in so that we have a organization-wide understanding of our approach to tools for service management and IT operations to really get the most out of the tools. And so, of course, that brings us then to our model. Now, what we've done with the model is we start with this grid. We call it the Lime grid. Some of you may have seen a version of this before. We introduced this late last year. And this is just the beginning of how we begin to share our run book with you. So I'm going to go a little geeky here for a minute, but this is what it's really all about. When we talk about good tool implementation, what we mean is, how do we ensure performance, availability, compliance, and security in a very mature way across the technology stack? What does it mean to do good monitoring of the virtual environment? What does it mean to do good monitoring of our servers, containers, our hybrid deployments? What does good look like for our ITSM and our ITSM integration? It's a complex but important strategy that allows us to take a holistic view of an end-to-end application delivery and ensure through our instrumentation and our monitoring implementations that we have all of the data we need to do good data analytics and to draw good conclusions about the performance of those applications and to better serve the communities that are depending on those applications. And that's just the tip of what we're doing with the maturity model. So the grid is a starting place. From there, for each of the technology domains, there's a run book of best practices that this is built on top of. And if you really start to dig into it, for those of you that have a background in ITIL, what you'll find is that in many ways, our maturity model is our way of making ITIL more user-friendly. Because if you've looked at ITIL, you know that it can be overwhelming, that a lot of organizations struggle to consume it, comprehend it, and actually leverage it. And so while we don't talk a lot about ITIL in some of our language, it's very fair to say that there's a lot of parallels between what we're doing in our maturity model and what ITIL tries to do. Our feeling is that ITIL is just not easy enough to use. And so we're trying to take a very comprehensive approach the way ITIL does, but we're trying to do it in a way that's much more adaptable and manageable for the organizations that we work with. So let's talk a little bit about how we apply Itom Plus in this work from home world. So with me today, I've got Lorenzo Brizeño, and Lorenzo and I have talked a lot about this, and we've talked about some of the considerations that we have to take into consideration as we look at approaching a work from home world. So Lorenzo, why don't you take us through the considerations, please?
Okay, so when we think about this, we go back to traditional office procedures, right? What does that mean? The average employee would wake up, would be out the door, have his coffee, be out the door, beat traffic, and be in the office somewhere about the 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock time frame. They would then get to work, do everything they had to do within a certain 8 or 9 hours if they were at work, and then get home, pick up the kids, and do that. This was a common. So your network usage peaked during those regular business hours. The work from home employee today, that's changed. They've gone from that hourly oriented now to task oriented. They have a set of tasks that have to be completed, and they have to do that sometime today. So now people are waking up earlier, getting a few hours in, then having breakfast with the kids, getting their kids online. They're sharing their home network with kids, learning from home. They're sharing their network with their neighbors in bandwidth. So you're seeing your networks now, their peak performance isn't in the middle of the day, but it's all day long. So any kind of poor performance you're having has changed. Your definition of peak performance has changed. Your definition of your network when it needs to be operating has changed. So you as engineers, you as administrators have had to make that adjustment to that. You've had to either get more equipment or change things around just to match it. So this is a moving target for most of us. We've never seen it before. We didn't have any models to work from. We're all just kind of making it up as we go along. And so you need to be able to have the tools where you can see where your peaks are, when the peaks are. People are online more often. They're no longer sitting there having conversations all day at each other's desk, going to have coffee with each other or taking long lunches. People are sitting at their desk working and hitting those networks, whether it's home network, whether it's chatting online, whether it's doing conference calls via some tool. They're just online more often and later in the day, because now people, even after work, when they get the kids to bed, people are getting back online because they feel there's less people online, so they can get some work done, get their emails done. So you're just seeing, this is the trend that we're seeing. These are the things that are happening. So your way of monitoring is changing.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we've seen, everybody jokes about the kids walking through the background, the dogs barking, the noises from outside affecting the video conferencing. But the other thing we're seeing is when somebody's video is jerky, when audio is failing, all of these tools that people are using now to do face-to-face video conferencing, whether it's Zoom or GoToMeeting or Microsoft Teams or any of the tools that you might be using, it's really, really apparent when there's poor network performance. We're seeing the demand on what has historically been a best effort network for sort of home networks and consumers. And as IT administration and network engineers and systems professionals, we have to now start to think about what can we do to help ensure that these folks, wherever they're connecting from, can have a strong enough network transport that they're going to be able to create the right impression and have the right experience, much like we're dealing with right now. In this WebEx, we've taken the time to ensure that the networks we're running on, and we'll knock on wood, right? The networks we're running on have the right capacity and the ability to deliver a good experience. But we've all seen it, not just the dogs barking, but also those community networks, those neighborhood networks that our employees are working from don't always have the capacity and the performance capabilities that we would expect to deliver a quality experience in a business setting. And so, yeah, these considerations mean that in some cases we have less control, but we still have to find ways to deliver experience.
Yeah, the level of devices and hardware that you're dealing with has also changed, because I can remember a year ago when I bought a Dell power switch for my home network, and everybody, why do you need that? Well, I need it now.
That's right. That's right. It's a good investment. So let's talk a little bit about then what's changed, right? So as we look at the work from home communications, sort of, how employees and customers are connecting with each other. More and more, we want to see this use of face-to-face tools, GoToMeeting, WebEx, right, Zoom. But now we have to start to think about what does that mean for our traffic flow, right? As our employees and the customers that they serve are interacting in these new ways, the traffic is largely, it may not be our traffic anymore. So one of the big considerations here, one of the big keywords that we see people talking about in the work from home monitoring today is VPN. And if you think about VPN, fundamentally, there's a choice you have to make about the way your VPNs work. So when somebody's at home or on a network that you don't manage, and they're making connections out to the world, there's really sort of two choices. And some of you may be familiar with this, but it's the idea behind running either a split tunnel or a non-split tunnel VPN. What that means is when their device connects into your corporate network, Does 100% of the traffic go to the corporate network before then going on to the internet? Or do you allow a split tunnel where the device that's in the field can go direct to the internet locally, but any corporate traffic would then only go over the tunnel? Because that can mean the difference between being able to monitor some Zoom traffic, or the Zoom traffic is separate and outside of your vision, while all of the rest of the traffic going to and from your corporate network you would still be able to see. We really have to think about that. And that's also influenced by where our applications are hosted, right? So whether we're talking about things that are in our own data centers or things that are in the cloud, what type of cloud instrumentation we might have. Increasingly, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and in particular, Amazon is leading the way here. They're ahead of some of the other cloud providers in giving us visibility at different layers into our cloud hosted solutions that we own. And then to some extent, how we monitor third-party tools, like how we monitor Office 365 or how we monitor Salesforce or some of these other very popular tools that are used that are purely cloud-based. And so that's what we're talking about when we say, well, how do we instrument for this, right? At its root, the concept of being able to collect information about our environment is about instrumentation. What are the protocols that we're using? Do we have SNMP? Do we have telemetry? Do we have WMI? Do we have some SaaS-based service that we can hit with queries? Or do we have web-based services that we can hit with HTTP or secure HTTP traffic? All of these different ideas need to be taken into consideration as we look at, again, that application layer, the business layers, the delivery layers of our full visibility stack that we're trying to build. So we'll go a little bit deeper here, and we'll talk in particular around the work from home scenario on two areas. So Lorenzo, as you've taught classes throughout the year and we've watched this crisis sort of evolve, you've been hearing about these two areas a lot, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because some of the things we've talked about is that this is actually something we've been preparing for years. If this had happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, we would have been using ISDN and having conference calls on AOL. Now, that's a whole different technology. We would not be seeing it. So we've been preparing for this for years. A lot of you have had to go out and buy additional firewalls, had to open up additional ports, have had to make that change. But this is nothing new. As professionals, you've had to do that in the past. You've had to prepare for moving to the cloud. You've had to prepare to move everything to a SaaS-based technology. This is exactly the same thing. The only difference now is that you didn't have the length of time to plan this. You didn't have that buffer time. You're kind of forced to do it on the fly. But your experience in making those kind of changes made that possible. So the main thing that's happening now, because people need to work from home, the increase in remote access has come alive. Whether you use Palo Alto, whether you use ASAs, whether you use Nexus devices, whatever you're using to get people online, those are things that through some of the newer technologies in SolarWinds, specifically the Network Insight family of products, you have access to information about remote access. You can see who's logged in. Users are able to develop reports and show their management who's logged in, what that peak traffic looks like, what the VPN specific traffic looks like. You can also do measuring the traffic. So using tools like NetFlow, we're able to track NetFlow traffic and see exactly what are the highest volumes. Are more people using Zoom? Are people using WebEx? Are people using GoToMeeting? Those are the kinds of things that you can track, you can narrow down, you can make business decisions based on traffic, based on peak, based on this information. And you as the technical leaders can provide that information through the use of these tools, reports, dashboards, and things of that nature.
Exactly. And so it's important to understand the full capability that we have as we consider what the tools can do. So the first one that we want to talk about here is our VPN monitoring capabilities. So there's some built-in capabilities that we have, but as we've seen through the dashboard conversations that SolarWinds has kicked off and what we're sort of building this presentation around, and it's what our offer is based on, right? So those of you familiar with what we're offering in conjunction with this webinar, we have set aside our team of engineers, a portion of them, to work with clients at a no-cost basis for up to 2 hours to help review and implement your work from home strategies, whether it's VPN monitoring or whether it's traffic analysis or something else that you'd like to use that time for. That's what we're making available as our way of giving back to the community and trying to assist people who are trying to deal with their monitoring needs in this crisis. Now, I will tell you that the response for this has been massive. So we are seeing a lot of requests, and we're doing our best to get those requests booked in and set aside time for everybody to be able to work with. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to us and understand that we will get you into the queue and get to you as quickly as we can, but there is quite a bit of load there. And so we are getting a week to 2 weeks into these calendars to get those sessions scheduled. But rest assured, we will work with you. So from a VPN monitoring perspective, if we take a look at some example dashboards that we've built and what we'll work with you to do in your environment, there's a couple of different places you can go to see these examples on your own, where SolarWinds has on their Orion demo server. If you've never seen it before, at oriondemo.solarwinds.com. In a moment, we'll talk a little bit more about Netpath, but out here in their environment, you can go into dashboards, into network, and you'll find a menu for Netpath services. And then here in our local environment, one of the examples I brought up here just to start with from a VPN perspective is we realize that not everything is going to be ASA or firewall based. So there are some organizations that are using Windows Anywhere or Work Anywhere in Server 2016, as well as just traditional Microsoft routing and remote access. And those are built-in capabilities of SolarWinds Application Monitor. So today, if you have SAM and you want to monitor routing and remote access, and you can see the impact of VPN activity on a RAS server with total clients connected. You can also see the traffic associated to that. We talk about that full stack visibility. Here's an example of an AppStack resource that shows us the relationship between the RAS application, the server that it runs on, the virtual environment that supports it, the storage behind it, and then of course we've got our network that we can associate to it as well. One of the other example dashboards that we've built in here around the work from home scenario, coming back to that VPN in a more traditional sense on an ASA basis, we have some custom resources that we've built here. So Lorenzo, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the resources that we're using from a VPN perspective? And then in a moment, we'll go and talk about the traffic side of it.
Right. So these resources are based off data that's being collected through the network insight. So the link status there showing each of the individual ASAs, the specific interfaces that we're able to pull that you would be the most interested in, and then what your utilization looks like. That's just one example. And again, while the ASA home details page VPN link that's there out of the box, we've gone it a step further and pull that into this page to create this custom dashboard. This dashboard then pulls information from several resources, including custom resources where they have custom code that's built in there, and then built-in resources or widgets so that we can get data from other resources. So the idea is that using a comprehensive customized dashboard, you can gather data from multiple products, multiple locations, and pull it all into one place. And it's built customized, right? So what does customized mean? Well, that's going to be different for every user and different for every single company. So that's why it's beneficial to take advantage of what we're offering, because we can't just wrap this up in a nice little zip file, send it to you, unzip it, and it works, right? It's going to be custom to your location. This example here is a script that runs a SQL query, right, from the SolarWinds query language that pulls this out. And we don't expect people to be SQL experts. We don't even expect you to be a SQL expert. But you can take this particular code, make a few minor adjustments to match your environment, and then it'll be off and running. The concept behind it is all the data entities that exist within SolarWinds are going to be the same. It's just, there might be some naming in here that needs to be adjusted. And that's the kind of help that Loop1 can give you.
Yeah, and I don't want anybody to think, boy, this looks really complicated. I don't know why SolarWinds makes this so hard. They really don't. The built-in capability of the tool is tremendously powerful. Installing the tool, adding an ASA to it, you're going to get all kinds of information natively. There's not a lot that you have to do after you've added your device to be able to see your site-to-site VPN tunnels, the remote access VPN statistics, all of the information that you see in this left side menu here and the correlated charts that are displaying on the right, those are all native. But what we're talking about is really being able to maximize the benefit by doing some custom work, by being able to build some intelligent dashboards that take some of the data that SolarWinds collects and present it in a way that SolarWinds can't do automatically, because there's no way for them to know your environment. And therefore there's no way for them to be able to say, okay, well, here's what's important for this client. So that's where we work with you. What Loop1 brings to the table in our knowledge and experience is to take this information and present it in more meaningful ways by doing a little bit of customization. And so the other thing that we do make available, though, is that we believe firmly in the idea that the more we can teach you, the better we all become. And so this isn't one of these situations where we want you to be dependent on us forever. What we would rather have is a relationship where you can count on us to help you with the things you need and know that we're not going to withhold from you the way that we do it. So not only are we willing to share the code with you that we write and leverage and that we share with the community in lots of different ways, the community shares with us as well, but we also teach courses around how to do this. Lorenzo, you want to talk a little about the courses that we offer so people can learn how to do this for themselves?
Yeah, we have two primary courses. We have our database course. So our database course focuses on the Orion database. It kind of goes through and lets you know the tables that are there, gives you some basic SQL command, and introduces the SQL. The SQL is the backend API that talks to the database. Now, SolarWinds recommends anything you do custom, you do it from a SQL perspective, because that allows you to have backward compatibility with older versions, and it keeps your code up to date much longer. So using that class, we spend 3 days, we go through that, then we teach you how to make calls, like maybe you want to automate changing the names of your hostname. Maybe you want to automate when you want to mute or put things offline. Maybe you want to automate certain dashboards. Those little techniques that you learn in here, there's really no end to it. You're only limited by your imagination of what you can do, but the class kind of gives you that jump off board to show you where you can get these things. And then we teach, there's a little bit of PowerShell around that to kind of show you how you can do that in automated fashion. Jumping off that, we also have a class called Coder Camp. The Coder Camp class focuses more on the PowerShell end of it. It still uses SQL within the PowerShell. So the combination of the two classes, where you learn the SQL first in the database class, and then you learn more with things like PowerShell, with Go, with Python. Those are the tricks that you learn how to wrap the internals of the database calls into code that you can either one, make more customized apps on here, more customized dashboards, or even make your own internal apps that you can use for doing things like even resetting passwords or any number of them. And people just come up with ideas all the time on how they want to do stuff.
Lorenzo, we had a question come in on what are the native devices that are supported for the insights? We've got insights on ASA, we've got insights on Palo Alto. Is there native insights on FortiGate, or what extent of the sort of native capability is there for FortiGate firewalls?
There's nothing on FortiGate per se. There is the F5. You got the F5 data that you can see, which really just shows the relationships. The main network insight again is going to be the Palo Alto, the Nexus, and the ASA.
So yeah, we've got network insights on ASA, network insights on Palo Alto, network insights on F5, network insights for the APC UPSs, where they're doing some extended monitoring automatically on the APCs. But there aren't yet network insights for FortiGate. Now, that doesn't mean that SolarWinds won't at some point in the future have insights on FortiGate so that it's a little bit more automated. And that doesn't mean that you can't still collect the same type of information from your FortiGate firewalls. One of the strengths of SolarWinds from the beginning is that all this information is available using SNMP and using custom pollers, and Loop1 has deep experience doing that. What they've done in some of these key products, though, is because those products are so common, they've made it a little bit easier without having to build custom pollers. And there's some custom UI that they've created around it as well. All of those things you can still do even without insights. It's just a little bit more work and a little bit more expertise to be able to go pull that information. But
If you
in
think
the
about
time, let's keep moving. We want to talk about traffic, right? And in particular, when we talk about traffic, we're talking about NetFlow, we're talking about NetPath. So do you want to start here, Lorenzo, talking about our NetFlow resources and the way that we can use that to look at, application-specific traffic like Teams or WebEx?
Yeah, so there is a method in NetFlow to kind of capture this information natively. There's also a method within NetFlow called IP grouping, where as long as you know the IP address of the place that you're trying to get to, you can create NetFlows for it. So WebEx, Zoom, a lot of those publish those IP addresses, and then you can create these IP groups to measure traffic going to there. It's a way of measuring traffic to your own website. You know the IP address of your own website, so you can create those. You can even use IP groups to measure groups of people or groups of IP addresses within your own organization. So as long as traffic is coming to or going from those specific IP addresses, you can track it. In this example, we've set up IP groups for the individual items here: Microsoft DS, WebEx, Microsoft Teams. And now using the perf stack capability here, we pull that data in here so you can see over the last 7 days, what is the most common usage. So you can see what's been peaking and compared to all these applications. So you'll know if your SNMP traffic is getting, you'll know if certain websites are getting used, you'll know if certain applications like WebEx or Zoom are being used and when they're being used the most. So this is
a good example of what it looks like to build an intelligent dashboard. I mean, here we actually have 4 or 5 different sources of data. We have NetFlow data, we have NPM data, we have insights data, and we're pulling this data together in a custom dashboard. So Philip was asking if it's possible to publish these dashboards without end user authentication. What can we do, Lorenzo, to make a dashboard available without having to log into Orion?
So there's a couple ways of doing that. Actually, you can create what's called a NOC view, and the NOC view then is shared across. Is just a URL link that anybody can look at. You don't have to log in at all, and that you can display either like in a NOC environment, which is what it's designed for, or you can just give it to people to look up, like a CEO or CIO. They can just look at this dashboard and see things. You could also create what's called a direct link login. That allows people to log in without using an ID and password. It just gives them direct access to the SolarWinds environment. You can limit that ID so that they can't do any editing or managing and limit what they can view. Those are the 2 easy ways of doing something like that.
Thank you, Lorenzo. So Philip, hopefully that answers your question. If you need more information on that, please reach out to us and we'll give you the specifics around how to work with those methods for accessing Orion without end user authentication. So we talked about the VPN monitoring. We've talked about traffic monitoring a little bit. The other aspect of traffic monitoring that we want to talk about, though, is NetPath. So Lorenzo, do you want to take us through NetPath? And I'll bring up the demo while you're talking.
Sure. So NetPath is a hop-by-hop accountability of traffic that's going from your router to your router within your environment. If you bring the NetSuite Bruno one, that's going to give us the...
Yeah, that's right. Let me grab that one.
And so if you're looking hop by hop per router, you're going to see things like latency. You're going to see packets being dropped for devices that are in your network. Now, NetPath is one of the only tools that will actually show you data past your network. So past that edge router, you're going to see information to a place like NetSuite, to a cloud-based service, to a network or through the internet to another network. You're going to be able to see that kind of information. Now, within your network, you're going to get that packet loss. Once you leave your network, the only thing you're going to get is latency. But you're going to be able to tell immediately at a glance when you see a red line, where is the slowdown? So when people call and say, my Outlook is slow, my NetSuite is not working, you can
just for a moment, Lorenzo. In the demo, you'll see the Bruno Office to NetSuite is largely a monitored network. So nearly every device in here is something that you can hover over and you can see. We've got SNMP access, we've got visibility into the configuration, we've got NCM access. If we're looking at an example, kind of like the Office 365 scenario, you can see a little bit more of what Lorenzo is referring to around being able to see the path when it's not on your network. So for example, in this East data center, We see our polling source, which is our agent and our source for the Netpath monitoring. But then we can see part of our network, and then pretty quickly we're into the internet. And even in the internet, we can see things like who the internet operator is for the device. And in certain circumstances, we'll even have contact information that you can use to even contact the network operators that are running third-party networks. So I'll go ahead and bring it back to the, go ahead, Lorenzo.
Expand that, like where it says 4, that means there's four connections in there. And if you double click it, you can see it expand or contract. So it goes pretty deep and shows you exactly where the slowdown is. And again, because you know the IP address, you can contact that user and or contact that vendor and let them know the IP address that's slowing down your users.
So, and then as you were starting to talk about, when we do have access to the devices and we're monitoring them in NCM, like we see here in the Brno office example, we can see a correlation between a change that's been made in our environment and a potential impact of that change.
Right. So if you go back one red line, I think it'll show up on the bottom history. It keeps a path history for 30 days. And so it shows you every day. And if you'll look at this particular one, what you'll notice is that particular router R9, there was a change that occurred to it. Because NCM downloaded those configs, it recognizes the change and it tells you immediately there's a slowdown on this router. Oh, and by the way, there was a recent change. There's a correlation between that slowdown and the change. And by clicking on config change, it's going to show you the side-by-side comparison, what it used to look like to what it looks like now. The change on this one, it's kind of down at the bottom. I think a route right there, IP route was removed. And so in this case, you can see immediately an IP route was removed. So as a network engineer, it's going to dawn on you like, that's probably causing the problem. You can revert that and fix it fairly easy. The other tool that's part of this built-in integration is NetFlow. So if any of those interfaces are on there, all you have to do is hover over the interface and you'll see all the conversations that are happening on that particular interface. So more times than not, if you get a slowdown, it could be that a config change. It could be that there's a lot of NetFlow traffic happening on that device. But those are two quick things that you can easily look at.
So one of the comments in the questions, Lorenzo, is around the reliability of the probes. Now, I know that we have seen some issues with probe reliability, and we're not going to say that that's not an issue, but I do think SolarWinds is committed to making sure that these probes are as reliable as possible. Do you know, Lorenzo, if there's been any progress on making the probes available on a Linux-based platform outside of Windows?
To my knowledge right now, that the requirement is that the probe has to be on a Windows machine that's being monitored by your Orion environment. I mean, in my classrooms, I've had a lot of positive feedback that people use this and they really enjoy it. They've gotten a lot of great information from it by creating these paths.
So, Ian, I would say that, in regard to probe stability, definitely make sure you're communicating that back to SolarWinds. I'm sure that you have. You can do that directly to the support team, obviously, and you can also do that through TWAC. But making sure that they're hearing your experience and that you're adding your voice to others who maybe have concerns around probe stability, you can ensure that that quality continues to improve and that they may do a release in the future that offers the probe capability from a Linux-based platform. We're running a little short on time here, so I want to keep us moving forward. We talked a lot about dashboards previously. Just one last comment on the traffic monitoring. That Netpath feature is an NPM feature. So if you haven't seen it before, you probably already own it. There's no additional investment needed to go take advantage of Netpath. It's really more a function of understanding your environment, working with your team or working with a group like ours to come up with a deployment strategy, get your probes deployed and start collecting that data. And then of course, putting it back into intelligent dashboards. So again, when we talk about intelligent dashboards, we're talking about taking information from all different sources and putting them together in dashboards that are context sensitive for particular audiences. So these could be server dashboards that are, or security dashboards that are team centric, or they could be application dashboards that are Salesforce or WebEx or Microsoft Teams, where we're taking NetFlow data and server application monitoring data and combining them to create intelligent dashboards. and we can be integrating with external sources as well. So intelligent dashboards is not just taking the built-in dashboards, but it's taking all of the different tools and using them in ways that help us get more value from the information. The other thing that we wanted to touch on before we get to our Q&A here is the idea that from a reporting perspective, you don't always have to have custom reports. A lot of times you'll find that once you have your monitoring set up, there are built-in reports you can leverage. And then of course, there's much greater depth you can go into with custom reports. You want to touch on that briefly, Lorenzo, before we jump into Q&A here?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it right there. It's with everything else going on, the last thing we want to do is learn how to create custom reports. So to start off with these two, you have the site-to-site VPN tunnel history, you have the remote access VPN tunnel history. Those are going to show you who's been logged in, how long they've been logged in, how your tunnels are performing, what the utilization is of those tunnels. It's a great place to start. At the very minimum, you might want to edit it and change the length of time, right? That's an easy change. Maybe you want it to last 7 days or last 24 hours kind of reporting. And you can also then add features to this in terms of being able to email this to the people that want to see this. So again, without them needing a login or creating access to your environment, you could just send them reports, create schedules and send them regular reports of how things are looking.
And then, of course, the last piece we want to cover off just before we get to Q&A is the idea that I know we're working with alerts regularly, but what we really want to do is help organizations mature away from looking at alerts as the last point in Orion and thinking about alerts as the first point in service management, where we're taking alerts out of the Orion environment and we're using them in really intelligent ways in our ITSM environment. And so our ITSM environment needs to be mature. We need to have our service definitions and our service maps defined. We need to be able to help correlate the monitoring data back to service map data so that when alerts do trigger, we have improved methodologies for correlation and improved tracking and reporting for resolution and improved ability to record sort of the knowledge associated to resolution, right? Keeping that information of how to resolve problems at the fingertips of your staff. And so this could be integration with a tool like ServiceNow. And of course, it could also be integration to SolarWinds' own service desk offerings. So like SolarWinds Service Desk, or even the SolarWinds Web Help Desk offering. There are a number of different integrations to be thinking about. But if you're today, your story kind of builds up through instrumentation, and now you've got your monitoring, and you've got some reports and some dashboards, and you're not yet taking these alerts and really integrating them back to your service desk and your ITSM solutions, that's the next step in maturity, is to make sure that your service management platform is just as mature as your monitoring platforms. And so with that, we're going to conclude the webinar. We'll go into a bit of a Q&A here. We do have one question that we'll get to in just a moment, Scott, on working with Netflow applications and Global Protect VPNs. But I just want to remind everybody that if following this session, you will receive an email offering you the ability to register for a session with our engineers. So please take advantage of that. And also thanks again in advance for your patience and understanding as we work to get the overwhelming response that we've had globally. This is our third out of 3 webinars, and we've presented to close to 300 people through these webinars over the last 2 days. So we've got a lot of follow-up to do, and we appreciate all the interest. We're eager to be working with all of you. So thank you for your patience, and we will be in touch if you fill out that registration and reach out to us. So just a couple minutes left here. Let's go ahead and get, Scott's got a question here, Lorenzo, about how can you get top NetFlow applications traffic coming from our Palo Alto Global Protect VPN? Have you worked on NetFlow traffic off of Palo Alto yet, Lorenzo?
So NetFlow protocol isn't going to give it to you natively. With that one, you would want to use the IP address group method that we talked about. So you would need to know the IP address that you're getting from, and then being able to monitor the traffic from the ports on your Palo Alto would then give you that information.
Yeah. So Scott, when working with NetFlow, what it really boils down to is where are our NetFlow sources? And I don't personally have deep experience with the Palo Altos. Doing these webinars, it gives me a reminder that I need to stay more in touch with the technology despite trying to be CEO. That's a whole other conversation. I'm an engineer at heart, so I do enjoy being in the technology. But really what we have to have is a source that can send us the NetFlow records that we need. And if there isn't a source that supports NetFlow, we need to find what's near it in the network that may have visibility to the traffic that it's processing. But one way or another, there's methodologies that we can apply to get the NetFlow source traffic that we want. And that goes all the way down into, similar to the comment earlier about using Raspberry Pi and tools like Samplicator, where we can go put probes into the network that are not SolarWinds probes, but are actual just Linux-based utilities that we use to go create NetFlow sources anywhere in a network. And so if you want to work with our team, we can tell you more about how we do that. But even when we have devices that don't support flow, we can usually get next to them in a network and we can get flow from that segment and we can start to do analysis. So whether the device itself supports it or whether we construct a methodology to get flow from a part of our network, there are ways to do that. All right, so we got a couple minutes here. We're just past the top of the hour, but I'm happy to keep going if others' questions are out there. Go ahead and put them into the Q&A, please, and we will try to speak to them just before we wrap up. I want to thank our lovely host, Miss Helen Owens. Thank you, Helen, and thank you also for your terrific work on the slide deck today. I want to say thank you to Lorenzo, our global public training instructor. Thank you for your time, Lorenzo, and your expertise. And of course, thank you to all of you for participating. We do have a recording of this webinar. I will warn you, I started the recording a little bit late, so we missed just the top of the presentation, but it is there, and we will produce it and share it. We'll also share the slides. And as again, if you sign up for that 2-hour session, the code that we've referenced and all of the other material that we covered today, we'll be happy to share with you. So Philip has a question about importing vendor-supplied MIBs into Orion. So just very briefly, Philip, SolarWinds doesn't themselves allow end users to bring MIBs into their product. However, you can provide a vendor MIB to SolarWinds, and they have a regular process where they update their MIB database. And whether you have the MIB in Orion yet or not, you can use the custom polling capability to collect any OID from any SNMP device in your network, even when the MIB is not yet a part of the SolarWinds database. So yes, there is a way to get MIBs into the database through SolarWinds, and whether you have the MIB in there or not yet, you can still pull those OIDs. And then we have one other question that came in on building executive dashboards across different industries, asking whether or not we have templates for this. We are working on sharing additional best practices around how we do things like dashboarding. So while we don't have anything at the moment, that is the type of thing that you can expect to see from us as we go through the end of this year and into the future. Loop1 is going to be sharing a lot more publicly about how we do what we do. And then Mike has a question about VNQM. So Mike, I'm going to wrap up here, but if you want to shoot me an email, it's billfitz@loop1.com. I'll send you a response here, and Mike will be able to answer your question as well. All right, thanks everybody. I appreciate your time. Enjoy your weekend, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Lorenzo.